Hello everyone, my name is Ashara and today I will be discussing climate change as well as two specific topics that are pertaining to that issue. Okay, so let's begin by discussing what exactly climate change is. So, as defined by the United Nations, climate change is the long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Although some of these changes are natural, since the 1800s, humans have been the main cause of climate change because of the burning of fossil fuels. When fossil fuels are burnt, they create greenhouse gas emissions, and this is important because naturally, when the energy from the sun warms up the atmosphere of the Earth, most of the heat is re-emitted out of the atmosphere. When greenhouse gases are created, they act like a cover on the Earth, trapping the energy from the sun into the atmosphere, which therefore raises temperatures. In the last 100 years, the average global temperature has increased by 1 degree Celsius, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it is incredibly significant when looking at Earth's lives and ecosystems. So an example is looking up north and seeing polar bears being unable to eat because the ice caps they hunt on are melting way too fast. So this is just a picture of the greenhouse gases when they're like normally being re-emitted back out into the atmosphere, and then this is the graph just describing about like the global average temperature increase. So, speaking of ice caps melting too fast, brings me to discuss my first specific issue, albedo. So, what is albedo, you may ask? The term was derived from Latin by Swiss polymath Johann Heinrich Lambert in 1760, in which albus meant white or whiteness. As for what it is, NASA explains albedo as the fraction of light that a surface reflects. Albedo works from a scale of 0 to 1 or 0% to 100%, and the amount of albedo reflected back to space by all of Earth's surfaces is around 30 to 31%, and this is called planetary albedo. On Earth, pale colors have close to 100% albedo, and this high albedo means that less energy is taken in by the ocean, which results in colder temperatures, whereas dark colors have around an albedo closer to 0%, and this low albedo means that more energy is being taken in by the ocean, which results in the ocean warming up, which therefore also results in the warming of the Earth. So why else might have I distinguished between the pale colors and the dark colors? It's because of the landscape that I mentioned earlier. Ice caps and Arctic are incredibly significant when discussing albedo because of something called the ice albedo feedback, basically how much they reflect back sunlight. Sea ice reflects about 85%, whereas the ocean only reflects about 7%, and this change is drastic, especially when you remember that sea ice is only becoming thinner every year. The way that this translates to climate change is that the less ice that there is, the lower albedo that there is, which means the more energy is trapped in the atmosphere. So it's basically a vicious cycle with fossil fuels, greenhouse gases, and low albedo, which all results in more heat on our Earth's surface. So this picture is just showing what albedo would look like for how much sunlight is being reflected off of the ice cap surface, whereas the difference is being shown with how it reflects on the ocean. And then this photo I just really like because it shows the polar bear that I was mentioning earlier. And then, so what do we do about this growing crisis about our Earth warming up so much? One potential solution is the other issue that I'll be discussing today, which is the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement occurred in December of 2015, while it entered force on November 6th of 2016. Canada, as well as 194 other parties, joined the agreement on December 12th in 2015. Now, what was this agreement, and why was it so important that so many parties decided to join? In 2015, the United Nations declared that climate change was a global emergency and got many world leaders together to help fight the issue. The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty. The UN declared that the long-term goals of the agreement were to 1. Substantially reduce global greenhouse gas emissions to limit the global temperature increase in this century to 2 degrees Celsius while pursuing efforts to limit the increase even further to 1.5 degrees. 2. Review countries' commitments every 5 years. And 3. Provide financing to developing countries to mitigate climate change, strengthen resilience, and enhance abilities to adapt to climate impacts. So the agreement gives way for developed nations to help developing nations to help developing nations to reach their goal, um, as for lessening climate change, as well as creating alternatives. And a couple ways for countries to help each other is with finances, as stated before, as well as technology. Climate change preventatives and getting alternate energy sources are not cheap and would be more difficult for developing countries to get a hold of without outside help. So the agreement also creates a structure to monitor and report countries' goals transparently, and the word transparent is really key here because it showcases the trust between countries and helps build the strength that the UN mentioned earlier. To elaborate on the 5-year cycle, countries are expected to submit an updated plan about how they will decrease their greenhouse gas emissions, and this is called a nationally determined contribution, otherwise known as an NDC. But what is the present day impact of the Paris Agreement? So, since the initiation of it, there's been a rise of low carbon solutions and new markets. More places around the world are establishing carbon neutrality targets, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change estimates that in 2030, there's going to be zero carbon solutions that are going to be a driving force in sectors representing over 70% of global emissions, which is a huge chunk compared to what it is right now. And yeah, so that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned something new. Bye.